I guess the first thing I would like to do is welcome Mr. Patrick Enright to the commission. Patrick, welcome. We're happy to have you with us. And as you know, David Kaufman, former commission member, he recently moved out of the county, was no longer able to serve on the commission. So Mr. Enright was actually just appointed 2 nights ago by the county council to the group. So Mr. Enright, thank you very much.
Well, it's my honor to be here, Madam Chair, and again, and as I was in 2012. But no, I'm honored to be here, and I'm happy to be with my colleagues tonight. And whatever I can do to help this process along for the benefit of the people of Anne Arundel County, I'm really happy to do that. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I know you've been one of our faithful followers. So we know that you are up to speed on everything we've discussed so far.
So far, I hope.
But thank you. All right. Our first and or so really, I guess our second item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the March 14th meeting. Any members have comments, questions, suggested changes to the minutes from March 14th? And if not, could I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye, raise your hand. I'm up, great.
Aye.
Okay, awesome, so our minutes are approved. All right, so our first meaty matter on the agenda this evening is again, just to discuss the fire department. Unfortunately, I was not able to participate in the March 14th meeting. But we have 2 items on the resolution from the council that we were asked to examine. One was to examine the powers of the fire chief to oversee and regulate riding members of the volunteer fire companies in Anne Arundel County. And the other was item number 11, evaluate section 547 of the charter as it applies to volunteer companies and any entities under which they operate. And I know from listening to the meeting, you had quite a bit of discussion on the topic. We did hear from Chief Wofford at that meeting. I think there was an interest from the members to also hear from the representatives from the Volunteer Firemen's Association from Anne Arundel County. So that is the first item. We wanted to provide that opportunity tonight. And members, since I wasn't at the meeting, if there's any further comment or things that you'd like to mention before we turn it over to the chief and the volunteer representatives, please jump in and do so, because I don't want to speak for you guys, because as I said, I was not there to participate in the meeting. But I think we really wanted the opportunity to hear from the volunteers. I know there were some questions that were posed. So I thought what we might do, and now I'm trying to find those real quick. Hold on a second, because now I'm. So Laura, do you have those real fast? I'm working between multiple screens, and I'm now.
I do, yeah. How would you like to handle that?
Actually, let me see. Wait a second. I think I'm getting it now.
Okay.
So I guess my thought was, I know we had a few questions that were posed from members and a couple follow-up questions. So maybe what we could do, I could go through the questions and provide Chief Wofford the opportunity to respond. And I know we have with us this evening, we have Kitty Gross, as well as Mr. Joseph Larson from the Anne Arundel Volunteer Fire Department. I know we would like to hear from them specifically on the 2 items from the charter, and they would probably be interested in responding to these questions as well. So unless there's any issues from members, or you'd like to chime in with any comments from the prior meeting, I can go ahead and read through the questions and do that, if that works for everybody. Okay. All right. Chief Wofford, I guess, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, when we submitted answers quite a bit ago to Ms. Corby, so I was under the impression that the rest of the committee would have those answers and would already have that information in front of them. Has that not been disseminated to everyone?
Chief Wofford, I apologize. I did not receive your responses.
You did not?
Looking through right now. No, I'm real sorry. There must have been some disconnect. My email's usually pretty reliable. I'm going to take another look.
I am also checking mine. And you only have one email address, correct? You have two.
I have, well, some of my email addresses are known as aliases, but they should all get to the same inbox.
Okay. Well, we can proceed. My apologies. We had the answers and had everything submitted, but I will we'll proceed and answer as we go.
Sorry about that. Yep. Yeah, so the questions, I'll just read through them very quickly and then let you respond, Chief Wolford. But one was regarding the purchase and maintenance of trucks and other equipment. Who owns these, the company or the county? Who's responsible for what, such as the repairs? Who bears the liability at the end of the day? For example, if there was an accident with a volunteer truck that was responding to a call, who would be liable? The owner of the equipment or the person who scheduled the volunteer? And also that is any of this covered in an agreement or an MOU? And I know we do have the MOUs in our Google Drive. So I know we do have that information. But yeah, but Chief Wolford, thank you. If people don't respond to those questions, maybe then we can hear from the volunteers in terms of these specific items, as well as their views on the questions as well.
Yes, and I apologize. As soon as I find the document, I'll forward it to Laura and then she can share it with the committee. So the answer to that is almost in all cases, it's going to be a little bit of both. Some of the individual companies own their apparatus. The county owns some of the apparatus. At the end of the day, the insurance, the maintenance, and the fuel all comes from the county. And that is talked about in reciprocity agreements. And there is an understanding of that. Up until a certain time frame, some of the volunteer companies have pieces of apparatus that are not considered frontline. And they have, for what I'll say is maybe parade purposes, where they don't necessarily run calls, but they still own and manage that at their own discretion. So that would be the easiest way to say that when it's definitely a large answer. So at the end of the day, the responsibility is predominantly carried by the county, but because some of the companies do own their individual pieces, there is still a liability on the county because those running their apparatus also have, a lot of them have career and volunteer members on it. And all of those members are covered by the county.
Okay. And I did notice, and I may not have the wording exactly correct, but in the reciprocity agreement, I know there was also language about the county reimbursing for legal costs and things borne by the volunteer company. Is that specifically related to legal costs associated with the equipment, or is that for other matters? And I can try to find that real quick.
I don't associate that with, Kitty, do you know? I don't associate that with any of the apparatus.
Okay. I forget where I saw that now.
Kitty, you're still muted. Madam Chair, if I could, I believe what the legal fee may be referring to is if a volunteer member has a subpoena to appear in court based on their duties, they do get a reimbursement from the county for that at a certain level. That's the only thing that I think that could be associated with legal fees.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, I can't find exactly where I read that now, but thank you for clarifying that. All right. I guess do members of the commission, do you have further questions or things for Chief Wolford, or are you ready to hear from the volunteer members at this point? All right, looks like we're ready for volunteer members. All right, so Mr. Larson and Ms. Gross, I wasn't sure who wanted to begin and proceed, but please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I can go first, and thank you for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen. I am the current president of the Anne Arundel County Volunteer Firefighters Association, and Joe is the first vice president. I would just like an additional comment to what Joe said about the insurance. I believe my understanding is, and Trish can correct me, or Joe if I'm mistaken, but the liability also would refer to an accident with one of the vehicles if it was on a call. What we are not covered for, if the apparatus is not covered for, volunteer apparatus is not covered for, is if the apparatus was basically totaled, then the volunteer company would be totally responsible for replacing that apparatus. I believe that's correct. That issue has not, come up substantially, but the county does insure all our apparatus. The thing that may be the point that may be of interest to the commission, and instead of interest to the council, because we've talked to council members, we routinely do an inventory of volunteer-owned apparatus, and one was done 3 weeks ago, listing all the volunteer-owned apparatus and its current replacement cost. We did that by collecting all of the information about the apparatus and then checking with the vendors for the apparatus, and the replacement cost for all of the apparatus currently owned by volunteer companies is $43 million and change. There's a great deal of apparatus that is owned by the volunteer companies. I would like to address the 547 issues, and 10 and 11 sort of run together for us, but I'm actually looking more at number 10. We did, as an association, have a board meeting to discuss this and see what it was in this that may have created issues for us in the past, or that we believe needs a little clarification. And I will go to first in section 547, where it describes the fire department shall be responsible for the administration of the affairs of the county in fire suppression, fire prevention, fire training, fire communications, emergency medical services, and any other duty that may be assigned by the county executive or by law from time to time. And as you know, our chief, Wolford at the time, our chiefs that are appointed by the executives really are the ones who have all the authority over those issues, and volunteers follow all of the directives and rules and regulations set up by the county fire administration. In the last sentence of that section in 547, the last section says, nothing herein shall permit the fire chief to participate in the corporate affairs of any volunteer company. What the executive board and the members proposed is that last sentence be amended slightly to read, nothing herein shall permit the fire chief to participate or influence the corporate affairs of any volunteer company, including but not limited to the administrative members of fire companies that have no operational responsibility to the county. We've had a few little glitches here and there where that is not specifically very clear, and it would be to the benefit of certainly the volunteers if that particular sentence in that last sentence could be amended.
Can you repeat that one more time for me? I'm sorry, Ms. Gross. This is Stephen Whitey. Can you repeat the change that you were requesting one more time for me?
Yes. Would you like the entire paragraph to be repeated, Mr.
No,
Waddick?
just
Yeah.
the section that
Just the section. All right.
Yes.
The section, the last sentence of that section reads, nothing herein shall permit the fire chief to participate in the corporate affairs of any volunteer fire company, because the fire chief controls all the operational functions of fire companies. But we believe that that last sentence that I just read is not as clear as it should be. We would like the sentence to be amended to say, nothing herein shall permit the fire chief to participate or influence the corporate affairs of any volunteer fire company, including but not limited to the administrative members that have no operational responsibility to the county. That's what has been suggested. There have been a few little glitches along the way, and we believe that that will sort of make it a little clearer. And we don't want to have to go through a practice where we'd have to, at some point, define all the corporate affairs. We don't believe that's necessary, because the corporate affairs that would be most affected would be those that might be proposed by the fire administration, would be those that affect administrative member. All operational members are subject to all the rules, regulations, and policies of the county fire administration, and we have no problem with that. That's the way it should be. Does anybody have any question about that? And if not, I'll go on to the.
Yeah, well, actually, Ms. Rose, I see a couple hands up. I do have a question, but I know Mr. Snow, his hand was up first. So Mr. Snow, please go ahead.
Sure, Tori Snow. Ms. Gross, I was wondering, could you provide a little bit of clarity or insight when you as an internal team make a distinction between whether something is an operational function or an administrative function? Can you give us a little bit of insight on how you guys make that determination?
Well, operational functions are basically, to make it very simple, is apparatus goes out the door. Anybody on that apparatus is an operational member. If there's anything to do with training, if there's anything to do with fire suppression, prevention, fire communications, anything to do with certification of writing members, how they are trained, what their minimum training requires, anything to do with medical services, any other duties that are assigned by the fire chief to members who actually go out the door on apparatus and deal with the public in emergency situations. Any people who are considered first responders are operational. The administrative members are basically mostly our corporate officers, although we have some corporate officers who also are operational members. But administrative members, they're the people who basically do the money raising. They run fundraisers. They deal with keeping us alive money wise. They're the treasurers. They keep the books. They're the chaplains. But they are not qualified to be on any company apparatus at any time. They don't interact with the public on any calls. They are strictly plain clothes administrative members. They're your secretaries, your chaplains, your committee chiefs, who's head of the apparatus, who's head of the fundraising committee, who's head of the house committee, who takes care of getting the place cleaned up and deals with the outside, and who deals with any property that we rent for storing vehicles, and run fundraisers, do little things for the public, have them come in and tour the firehouse and anything like that. That actually, the easiest way for me to explain it is they never on a piece of apparatus goes out the door to a fire call.
I think maybe to just kind of follow up, maybe you could give us an example of when there has been a dispute or perhaps a difference of opinion about what is operational versus administrative. Is that something you've experienced?
There've been a few little glitches. The latest glitch is we have been asked to put all our administrative members, present and future, through background checks. And that has raised some issues based on the fact that companies believe that their administrative members are simply corporate members. They have nothing to do with fire suppression and basically fire things. There are some disputes within individual companies about how strict that has been, and we also have a huge number of operational members who, because they either work in government or they work a lot of them work in the school systems, or they sign up for Parks and Recs because they're coaches in their kids' teams. They also have already had background checks. But overall background checks for administrative members, we just see some, there's resistance to it. It is not widespread resistance, but it does cause issues of, well, we don't report to the county for anything, and we don't have to go through, fingerprinting, and we don't have to go through physical exams, and we don't have to take specific training. And a lot of these people who we have administrative members a lot of them are older members of the community. They tend to be community members who just want to do, one more thing. And they sort of object to that. So, and Chief Wolford is familiar with fuss over background checks, but that it's just one of those silly things, and partly because corporate affairs are not well defined, but they consider anything that administrative members do as the corporate affairs. They're feeding people who come for breakfast with Santa Claus and, things like that, meeting with the Girl Scouts and, those sort of things. They may not seem big items to you people, but for, community members who just come in to do, a few hours a week to help out at the fire department, we're having some resistance that we prefer not to have, since the chief doesn't have to worry about these people in terms of all the other things she deals with that deal with express responsibilities of first responders, which are massive, and their training requirements are also massive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Telfer, I know your hand was up next, and I know then I'm going to go to the chief, and then Mr. Larson, I'll follow up with you. So go ahead, Mr. Telford.
Larry Telford for either Ms. Gross or Mr. Larson. Has any activities of the current administration over the past 3.5 years caused any decline in the number of volunteer firefighters or the number of folks who are willing to be on the administrative side of the volunteer fire companies?
Well, yes, the answer to that is yes. We have had a decrease in the number of volunteers. Whether that can be attributed to rules and regulations, that would be somebody's guess, and I wouldn't venture to go there. There are a lot of reasons possibly for that, but we have had some decrease in the number of volunteers, not at all companies. My particular company, I've been a member of Station 7 on Route 424 in Gambrills, and I've been there, I think it's now 33 years, and I joined when I was 4, in case you want to know. But we don't see it so much at our company, but there are many companies that have complained, but we don't do exit interviews. So if I were to give you a definitive answer as to why, it would be a guess, and I wouldn't venture to go there. It may have a lot to do with, what's going on in society, that I wouldn't attribute it to anything without some real decent study.
Okay,
but it is an issue.
Okay, Chief Wolford, would you like to respond?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Mr. Telford, great question. And I do agree with Ms. Gross. Nationally, it's actually a national issue of retaining volunteers in every state across the country. So the numbers have gone down, but I would agree there's no data that supports why those numbers are going down, whether it's COVID or busy lifestyles or having to work multiple jobs or kids or me or whatever it is. But the numbers do go down and we don't know why. Mr. Snow, I thought you asked an incredibly perfect question for us to answer about the operational versus administratives. And, the proposal to change that wording to influence corporate affairs or wording of that like, I do find would still be problematic. It is difficult to understand what corporate affairs means. And I think that is where we always run into issues. Being able to define that would be very helpful. I do have a lot going on with the operational folks, but I do consider the administrative folks my responsibility and part of the family also. All of that exists because it operates under the umbrella of the county fire department, which I oversee. So I think it would be a luxury to say we could split something off when realistically we can't do that. They still represent the companies. They still do a lot of great work to support the companies, as Ms. Gross said, financially. But for me, in terms of, you were asking for an example of, what would be an example? And the background checks are a fantastic example. I had asked the administrative members to go through the same minimal background process that we do for coaches in Anne Arundel County that Parks and Recs uses. It's a very minimal process. You can do it on your phone or online. It's $7. And I do that because I do think there is a liability, as Ms. Gross stated. These are people that are in the fire station in a public building, whether it's county owned or volunteer owned. The public knows it as a place where they can be. Breakfast with Santa, these folks have exposure to kids. Tours in the firehouse, they have direct contact with the public while taking care of other administrative details. But I think it would be poor procedure on my part to not cover that liability for the county to understand who we have representing the fire service in Anne Arundel County that is in contact with our public. We know if we have somebody with a felony record, that is a tier 1 sex offender, a tier 2 sex offender. Those are things that I think we should know, so we're not putting those companies in jeopardy or to have the county being liable. So something like that is why I put it in place and why I asked everyone to do it, because there really is no way to separate the administrative members if we don't define what corporate affairs mean. The reciprocity agreements do say quite a bit, but there's also a piece in some of the reciprocity agreements that doesn't allow me to add staffing to a station because the county doesn't own that station. So the line is really not clear, because to me, that affects operational matters, because the operational matters are what serves the community. So it's a difficult line that is very blurry. It's been very blurry since 1965 and our inception of a combination fire department. But for me, it's not changing the wording. It's understanding truly what is a corporate affair and what is not, because I can't understand why I can't put staffing in a station to better serve the needs of the growing community, and that's considered a corporate matter or a corporate affair. So these lines that are not clear, that is where the problem lives. And that is where we always come to this point of trying to figure out how to handle it. And in the end, I don't think anyone wins, because it just distracts our time from serving and giving back to what we need to be doing, which is focusing on the community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I will supplement what the chief said. Not all companies agree that and I should put it this way. I do not believe from my position, from what I see, is that companies disagree with the need. And we know a number of companies who have defined their own background check systems. My own company told me at the last board meeting that they have designed a background system check that they want to use for all. And it's all existing members and coming in members. And there are plenty of companies who are not, are what I should say, or don't object to it. They object to the order for it coming down from HQ. That, I mean, I think that's what it boils down to.
Mr. Larson, your hand.
Thank you. And to clarify, the background checks themselves, and again, like President Gross said, they're not objectionable to be done. It's the unfunded mandate that was put on us in a with the $7 that the chief mentioned is for the initial, for all of our current administrative members to be background checked. Then after that, all new members, and that $7 is still on the burden on the company itself. We would probably estimate that we have around 500 administrative members to do background checks on. And then after that, the burden is on the company and the member, how the company wants to do that. And then that $7 is no longer $7. The price goes back up. We haven't heard what that price is going to be. But to talk about background checks in itself, companies do their due diligence to background check their incoming members. So the background check in itself is mandated by the department. I'm not sure which office maintains the list of qualifying and disqualifying points, but that's not made known to the volunteers what those qualifying and disqualifying points are. My understanding, though, is that the disqualifying points for volunteers is much more stringent than the disqualifying point for hiring a career member. So, but still, we don't know what those disqualifying points are. We definitely would, throw a red flag up for anyone who has a felony, anyone who has a history of, or is a registered sex offender. Those definitely are red flags. But the other disqualifying points we are not made aware of. But like I said, it's the unfunded mandate. It's the administrative members don't have any responsibility to the fire chief or to the administration. They are simply members of a 501c3 or 4, so an independent nonprofit corporation. We are incorporated as volunteer fire departments. So that's where it is. We don't have an objection to doing our due diligence. We have an objection to it being forced upon us when we already do it, and then unfunded mandate as far as the price, the cost that's absorbed back to either the member or to the member company, and it's not reimbursable to, that additional cost is not reimbursable from the department, and I lost track of the other issue I wanted to talk about that President Gross had mentioned, but I can leave it at that for now. So.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Mr. Enright, I know getting a lot of feedback. Mr. Enright, I know you your hand was up next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the differentiation between operational and administrative with respect to the word affairs in line 1. I addressed my question to the chief. Would it degrade your abilities of the fire department if the word operational affairs was inserted in there, which would imply that administrative affairs would be, something else, would be broken off from just the word affairs, meaning operational and administrative entities. And the next thing I was going to say was I've been an election judge in 713, and our voting location is the fire station, volunteer fire station at the intersection of Bell Branch Road and 424. Been there for, since election since about 2004, 2006. And we've had some interesting interactions with the public in terms of volume of public participation and voting at that fire station. And I want to say that the crew at that fire station over all those years have behaved in the most professional and safe manner in the interaction with a large amount of public participation in the voting at that fire station. But still, it amplifies the need for liability, for control. And I don't know if that control of the station in those instances would include operations, or would that be administrative? And again, I go back to my first, not really a suggestion, but inclusion of the word operational only before the word affairs, which would then beg the question of, well, who's going to handle administration? So I just thought I'd throw that out to Chief Wolford.
I would just, not to answer your question, Mr. Enright, but correct something that our first Vice President said. The mandate is not totally unfunded. The fire chief has offered to pay half of the fee for everybody who we would currently have to do. And then now we're looking at maybe 500. And the unfunded mandate would come for all new members, not for everybody who currently exists in an administrative function in our current situation. And as I said before, many of the people who are in that position have been, they've actually been background checked before by virtue of their job. We have a lot of Secret Service people, we have a lot of NSA people, we have a lot of NASA people, and we have a great many government employees in all departments. So it's, even though we have 500 people, we may not need 500 people to start with to be checked. And the unfunded mandate only goes moving forward. It's the huge number that we have of people who are already here. The fire chief has offered to take care of that. Half of it, she would have her department pay half of it, and we are appreciative of that. And I do want to emphasize that not all companies are as upset with this. It's just I think it comes back to what the chief said, and that is that corporate affairs are fuzzy in terms of how well they're defined. And for the most part, what most companies look at to define and differentiate corporate affairs and operational affairs from administrative is, it basically is, if you are not going out the door on a piece of apparatus, you're an administrative person. If you have no training to any first responder service, you're an administrative person.
So let me, before I call on Ms. Hangleiter, I guess Chief Wolford wanted to ask if you had a response to Mr. Enright's question before we move on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Mr. Enright, just to respond, I think it could be helpful, but along with that, I would want to further define what operational means and the scope that would cover. Just inserting additional words, I don't think will help. So if we are unable or unwilling or can't define corporate affairs to understand what is all encompassing in operational, that could be highly effective.
Yes, thank you, Chief. I'm a specificity geek, so I totally agree with you on definitive pronouncements in something like the charter and also the code. But yeah, I'm on board with you. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Hangleiter?
Thank you very much. I did want to ask a little clarification that I never realized. You had mentioned in our last meeting, Chief Wolford, that there are 5 stations that are completely volunteer owned. And then you just mentioned something about that you can't staff there. So that means that there are no paid staff members at those 5 that are volunteer owned. Is that correct?
No, ma'am, that would be incorrect. So right now, all 31 fire stations in the county have career staffing. And so whatever that complement of career staffing, when the stations that have writing volunteer members come in, that's just an additional complement, which is fantastic. So if the career folks are in 1 engine and 1 ambulance, and writing volunteer members come in and they can stand up another engine and another ambulance, now we have 4 pieces of apparatus going out to serve the community instead of 2. What my statement was in regards to is if I wanted to increase my career staffing because maybe there aren't a lot of volunteers coming in and I don't have the ability to schedule or know when they're going to be there, right now at some of those stations, because we don't own it and it's not county property, I don't have the ability to add additional career staffing. And I don't have the ability to control when the volunteers are riding. So at the end of the day, the community is the one who goes with less. And our number 1 priority is to make sure the community always gets more. So I don't have that ability right now on some of those stations. If I wanted to say, I want to put 2 more 24-hour firefighters in there so I can have another ambulance or a medic unit because this area is growing and very busy. So it does hinder staffing, which I feel hinders operational needs.
Yeah, can I ask you? Can I ask the chief a question? My understanding in our station, certainly whenever, and our station building is owned by Anne Arundel County, but I know that in our situation, in my 33 years there, when headquarters has wanted to put someone there, all that takes is a vote of the board of directors. Are you saying, because I'm not familiar with what you described, are you saying that in volunteer owned stations that's not the procedure, they just refuse, or you don't get the opportunity to have a vote on it?
Yes, ma'am, they just refuse.
All right. If I could,
Mr. Larson, go ahead, and then I'm going to know had a question, and I have a few of my own I'm going to circle back to. So go ahead.
With the matter of staffing and adding additional staffing, I'll be honest with you, some volunteer companies have requested to have additional staffing and have not had that happen. With the part of the chief wanting to add, or the operational administration wanting to add career firefighters to a volunteer company, it's simply an ask of the chief of that volunteer chief of that company, and a lot of times they will agree. So I don't think that the volunteers refusing that additional staffing is actually accurate.
Yes.
I would agree to disagree, because I know of a certain company that's requested a paramedic unit or additional staffing or something, and it's not been added. And then it's an ask of the volunteer chief and an ask of the company, and 9 times out of 10 they would comply or say yes, we'll be happy to have that. And I know some have requested additional staffing and haven't gotten it. And it's been, I don't know the reason. I can't explain the reason, but that has happened. And it's not as much as us being stubborn and refusing. It's a matter of, it's simply an ask.
All right. So, actually, is anyone else getting weird background noise here and there and having interference going on? Okay, I'm not sure why or what's going on or what. Laura, are you seeing anything on your side, or is there something you think we should be doing to?
No, actually, I was just checking to make sure that from what I can see, the signals are all good. I guess there's a couple of, this is the hard part with Zoom. You can't have too many people unmuted. So it can be a bit of a pain to be in one of these meetings, but you do have to kind of mute, unmute. And if you do that, it will help.
Okay. Not sure if it's connection related or being muted, but okay. Hopefully that will help. I know, Mr. Snow, your hand was up.
I'd like to defer to you, Madam Chair, and then you can come to me after.
So I guess Well, it's more of a broad general statement. I mean, I understand the concerns, and I hear the what's being said, and I understand that. But I mean, a couple of comments. One, I know Ms. Gross, you stated that not all the volunteer companies feel this way. And looking at the language in the charter, the fire department shall be responsible for the administration of the fairs and the county suppression and so forth, and the fire chief. I mean, I guess I'm hesitant to kind of insert ourselves in this issue if we're, especially with the language that was proposed and using the words like influence and so forth, which I think are just as nebulous and undefined as maybe what some of the current issues are. I guess I'm hesitant to try to insert language into the charter that's going to make this maybe more confusing. And so I guess I'm wondering, I know there was a reciprocity agreement that you had in place, and if that is the appropriate means or process to try to resolve some of these issues, better define terms, and place better parameters on these things, because I guess I don't want our charter to be structured in such a way that, one, it makes things more confusing, two, it ties the hands of the fire chief in some way and has larger ramifications for public safety in the county, ensuring that there is proper coverage. So I guess I'm wondering either, Chief Wolford, or I know Mr. Barron, you're on here as well. I mean, in terms of alternative ways to address this, I guess I'm feeling there's other ways to do that, which would lead me to say that I guess I would propose that the charter is not the appropriate place to address these matters going forward. And I guess I would interested in your response to that.
Are you looking for my response?
No, I'm just looking for Chief Wolford and also Mr. Barron on that regard.
Mr. Barron, would you like to go first? I'll follow you.
Sure thing, Chief. No, I think you're raising a good point, Madam Chair. Listening to this discussion and hearing these issues, a lot of what has been discussed are, as you pointed out, things that are contained in the reciprocity agreements or operational administrative functions of the fire chief in her duties. I'm not sure how we could craft something for our charter that wouldn't compound the issue. I think what we're talking about here is mostly policy issues rather than structural charter issues, is 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. I guess, Mr. Snow, did you have a comment you'd like to make? Because I was going to suggest that maybe go ahead and I'll follow up.
Glad that I deferred, because you pretty much said what I was thinking. I was just listening to a lot of the discussion, which I think there are legitimate issues. The problem is I'm not a firefighter. I've never been a firefighter. And I just got cross-eyed, listening to some of the things that were being discussed. And I couldn't even imagine how we would begin to try to craft language in the charter. And then, as you pointed out, I legitimately feel like these type of conflicts, there have to be other mechanisms to address this. Like, I mean, if we were going to try to outline operational versus administrative, I mean, maybe we can get a comment from the Office of Law, but the language for that I just can't even begin to have any sort of authority in putting that together. So I'd like to echo your sentiments that it doesn't feel like changing the charter in any way would do anything but make the situation more complex. That's just my sentiment.
All right, given that, I guess I'd like to ask the members, or I guess maybe I can just make a motion. And Ms. Tangler, did your hand just go back up? Or is it a hanging hand from prior?
No, it is another.
Okay.
I was actually I was trying to finish up earlier, but I was going to say the exact same thing as what you and Mr. Snow were just saying. And that fact that I think there's some other way to handle this rather than the charter. Is that something that we could put in our report, that we recognize the challenges that Ms. Gross and the volunteers, as well as Chief Wolford and the department were, we would like someone else to take attention to it, but it's not of our concern. It's not, I don't want to say our concern, but it's not something that we can truly handle. I'm also concerned with, if that were to be a charter amendment and it goes on a ballot, how it just took us 2 meetings at an hour apiece to determine what the problem was. So when you put a one line on a ballot, is anyone even going to understand what we're asking of them?
Right.
Very good point. Yes, very good point. Yes. And I think that I think that's reasonable. I think maybe our motion could be we recommend not specifically making a recommendation on item 10 and 11 from the resolution, but we could include language in our report that says these are matters that we feel should be looked at more closely, and whatever appropriate mechanism or means should be handled.
Right. Well, that's certainly acceptable. I have, if we want to move on from that, I just have one other item.
Well, actually, Ms. Gross, if I could stop you, because I have several hands up.
I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Hand was up, so maybe Chief, I'll start with you, and I'll go across the top of my screen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Mansfield and Ms. Hangleiter. And Mr. Snow, those that spoke, I couldn't agree more. We have other areas where we can address these issues. It's what we've been doing since 1965, and it just takes time as there's culture change and departmental change, and as we modernize how we serve in the community. And it's the exact reason that Ms. Gross and I are in the positions that we are in. We've worked very well together, and we anticipate doing that moving forward. So I would agree. I think there's other areas where we can handle policy change and rules and regulations and work through it as we have been doing. I do greatly appreciate the time that has been put into this. And I know your heads are spinning to learn about how our combination fire service works. What I can say is that you all are in wonderful hands, no matter who shows up at your door, career or volunteer. And that's the most important thing to know about our fire department.
Great. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Thank you for spending the time with us. We greatly appreciate it. Mr. Enright, your hand was up next.
Yes, Madam Chair. I would like to point out that my firm belief personally is that charters and constitutions are frameworks for governing. They are not repositories for legislation through the code creating process. As such, I would like to point out that in line 3 of section 547, it talks about duty assigned by the county executive or by law from time to time. I believe that all the nitty-gritty material can be controlled by the county council and the county executive through the codification process, not necessarily by amending the charter. If the framework is good and the scaffolding is good, then I would suggest we leave it as is and rely on this by law from time to time phrase to be the operative fall on your sword position, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. All right, Mr. Larson, I'm going to give you the last word, and we're going to wrap up this discussion and move on.
Thank you very much. One thing, and the members had mentioned about a mechanism to resolve these issues, and one mechanism that had been in place in the charter in the past and had been removed and moved to county code. And it was a belief of the association to have it reinstated is the Fire Advisory Board. The Fire Advisory Board, for those that aren't familiar, is a board, an executive level board made up of three citizens, 3 volunteer members, and 2 members from the union and 1 representative from the fire chiefs or the battalion chiefs level. And as it's written in code is absolutely acceptable, with one addition is that those members, the civilian members, be members who have not had any prior fire experience, whether it be career or volunteer, just straight members, civilians from the community. So that would be a proposal for a mechanism if you would so choose to reinsert that into county charter.
Okay, let me ask, because in looking at the county charter right now, section 546 is the Fire Advisory Board.
Yes, ma'am. And in that it says it was this abolished, but however, it was moved to county code, subtitle 412-1-401, of county code, and that's where it resides now. And it's it's kind of at the discretion of the county executive, whereas if it were in the county charter, it would be a requirement. And that would be an excellent mechanism to address a lot of these issues.
I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that. And I think having a conversation that starts to border into the powers of the county executive and who is in that position, I would be remiss to have that discussion unless there was a greater panel here to consider something like that. I don't think I'm in a position to speak for the county executive and what they choose to do or not to do.
Yeah, and actually, and Chief Wilford, I would say I agree with you. I think matters like this are much better suited for the statute. I think also from the fire department's flexibility, from the financial, I think it gives you more flexibility as well to try to address these matters. If there is a problem, you need to change membership terms or the issues that the board would consider. I think it's much easier to address those matters through county statute versus having those in a county charter that then is reviewed every 10 years like we're doing now and has to go to the ballot to do that. I think it gives you more flexibility actually having that type of structure in the statute.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, so back then for members of the commission on this issue, maybe I'll just go ahead then and I'll make a motion that the commission not make recommendations specific to items 10 and 11 of the resolution, but we do include language in our final report just to reflect the conversations that we have just had and suggest that these matters be looked at through other appropriate means.
Very good.
And is there a second from anyone? Or do you want to wordsmith that?
Second.
Okay, second, was that, okay.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you, Chief Wilford, greatly appreciate your time. Ms. Gross and Mr. Larson, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you for educating all of us on these matters too. We greatly appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, moving on then to our next item. We're going to talk about the county income tax. I know that was, let's see, item number 9 from the resolution. We were asked to evaluate placing a limit on the local income tax rate in Anne Arundel County. And thank you. I do want to say, Mr. Snow, thank you. I know this was discussed at the meeting on the 14th, and you suggested that we hold off until all members could be present to have the conversation. So thank you for your consideration on that front. And I guess I'll just start with a couple of comments. I think just from my perspective, I will say, I think there's already a cap or a limit that's specified in state statute, and that's at the 3.2%. I know our county rate, I believe, is at 2.5, which is one of the lower rates in the state. So Anne Arundel County has never been close to bumping up against that 3.2% cap. So I guess I'm wondering why we were asked to look at the issue specifically. If there already is a limitation in state statute and we're not bumping up towards the cap in any manner. But just from a broader perspective, I think I'd have general concerns with trying to limit this type of ability. I think it just really limits the flexibility of the county executive and the council in making decisions and managing the budget. But that's my perspective on the matter. So I'm going to give the members the opportunity to respond or also share your views on imposing an income tax cap. Mr. Snow?
Certainly. I think that the rationale behind it, if I can kind of guess, is the actions and behavior of the Maryland General Assembly are very erratic. We do know that the climate and appetite for spending is significant, and the risk for just complete and radical unchecked spending, there's absolutely no guarantee that any sort of guidelines or restrictions or anything would be anything to be a bulwark against taxpayers. And so, at least from my perspective, from a philosophical perspective, I think that in a state like Maryland, in which there's very concentrated power among a very powerful political movement that has a clear incentive to spend, to me, this feels like a reasonable, reassuring measure to let the residents of Anne Arundel County know that their interests are at least being looked out for, and that, you know, as we plunge headlong into record inflation, we're still, despite all of the economic hardships that people are facing, there's no regard given to the impact that it's having on everyday Marylanders, and specifically everyday Anne Arundel County residents. So to me, this would be a basic measure to provide some similar to the property tax cap, just to say, you know, whatever the state chooses to do here in Anne Arundel County, we're at least going to add an extra layer of protection. So for my part, I'm actually supportive of, I don't even know what the number is, even if it's setting it where it currently is, but at least putting a bulwark in place. I think that would be a wise measure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Snow. Hey, Mr. Enright, your hand was up next.
Yes, Madam Chair. Again, keeping with the idea of a charter as a framework for governing, tax caps notwithstanding, if you embed a tax cap in the charter, it's going to take you 2 years to revise that, because you need to do it in the election cycle. However, if you do it in the legislative or the county council process and putting caps on, that way you have much more flexibility. You don't restrict the flexibility to make changes that respond to crises or crises that go away, that would necessitate putting caps on. I'm not opposed to caps. I'm opposed to, or I'm sensitive as to how the caps are applied. And I don't think that embedding a tax cap operation in the charter is a really good idea. But I'm not opposed necessarily to capping taxes, but I think the flexibility is the key issue here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Enright. Okay, Mr. Fleckenstein?
I just am curious. We did have a pretty good discussion on this the last time, and I know that Ms. Corby provided us some good information comparatively. But I guess my question is this. I didn't see anything come through the state legislature this session that the state was discussing or made any change to the state cap. Am I wrong about that? Did I miss something there?
No, there was nothing before the General Assembly to increase the cap. Actually, the 3.2%, honestly, I can't remember exactly when that was put in place, but it's been in place for years. Oh, wow. Whenever they first instituted the piggyback income tax, and I can't remember. Yeah, I think maybe you just said the year. So, I mean, there wasn't anything along those lines. And there hasn't been. I know there was, to be fair, there was an issue. This was several years ago, dealing with education and maintenance of effort funding for education through the funding formula that the General Assembly did. It was through the budget, and maybe there was the budget language, but they did say the jurisdictions that were at the maximum rate, they got some additional funding, but it was also because those jurisdictions were I guess really the poorest in terms of the wealth formula. So there was that, but that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But there's been no change in terms of the cap.
Has there been, then it's kind of a follow-up, has there been something in our council that there's been a debate about this or a discussion about this, or is there something going on locally that, again, that I feel like I must have missed, if there's been some debate in the council about this or something controversial in the council about it?
So, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Corby.
We did have, I'm trying to find it, we had a charter amendment resolution that was proposed a year or so ago, I think. It was defeated. And then at the state, I think there was a Senate bill, it was 736, but it doesn't look like it went anywhere. I'm certain that Mr. Hunt or Mr. Barron can talk to that, because they follow session. But let me, I'm just going to jump back into the other part of my computer and find that resolution that the council did. I'm pretty certain was a couple years ago. So I'll be back.
And Mr.
Okay. I'll wait on that, but I mean, even if that's a couple years ago, it kind of answers my question. So I appreciate the responses. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Mr. Telford, I think your hand was up next.
Larry Telford, I think one of the impetuses for this question, of course, is we do have a property tax cap, and the state basically told us, of course, a couple or 3 or 4 years ago, we could ignore it if we want under certain circumstances. So I think this is just another way of trying to make sure we don't keep raising taxes even when we have a tax cap. I do believe if we're going to vote on it up or down on this question, though, there needs to be like a definite definition to it. Like, is the current 3.2? Is it a different number like 3? Is it 4? I think we need to have just some kind of a number, even if most of you don't even like the concept, because I think that's the easiest way of looking at it and deciding if we want to move forward with it or not.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know that I know in state statute, it's the 3.2%. I'm not sure.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
No, go ahead.
The current county rate is 2.81%, and that is the 4th lowest in the state of Maryland.
Okay.
So there was, Madam Chair and Commission members, in 2019, there was a resolution, and it was, I can show it to you if you want to see it. It was Resolution 1819, and it was a simple proposal to add an income tax cap, I guess. It just said that the annual county income tax may not exceed 2.5%, or any minimum set by state law that is less than 2.5%. So the resolution was not adopted by the council, and so therefore it did not go to the ballot in 2020. I think the purpose of asking the commission to look at that was, is there some other idea, or, just kind of taking a closer look at the idea that, again, in 2019, the council did not accept.
Okay, thank you. Got that. I'm not sure whose hand was next, so Mr. Waddy, I'm going to go to you.
I was just say I appreciated the discussion at the meeting last when you all had this talk. I think Mr. Kaufman missed his presence, although Mr. Enright, you're definitely a wonderful substitute. And I appreciate you joining us. And I like what Mr. Fleckenstein said at the last meeting, and that it was a solution in search of a problem. When I think the biggest problem that we have is income inequality. And income inequality being what it is, and now we want to put a cap on people whose incomes have, or taxing people's incomes have exponentially increased, that may live in this county and are just making out like gangbusters while so many others are suffering on housing, healthcare, and as I think Mr. Snow recognized the need for increased government at the last meeting, well, the desire amongst a certain group of people to increase the role of government, which I totally support, especially in this era of income inequality. And I think that the need is not being matched at all. And if we did increase taxes on the wealthiest people in this county, income taxes, I think it would be helpful for the county government to expand some of the needs into building public housing, providing healthcare that we need, and just expanding some of the things that we need in this county, especially in the areas that are most under-resourced. So I'd be against capping income taxes in the county charter, and I thank you guys again for bringing this discussion to us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Waddy. Ms. Hangleiter?
Thank you. So when you ask where this is coming from, I'm not sure, but I will say that this is the first time we've had a charter revision since the 2000 or 2020. And in 2020, there was the year that we went from a 2.5 to a 2.81% local income tax rate. It's also, there was a state legislation to move it. House bill moved to Senate Bill 1040 that they were trying to increasing to 3.5% the maximum rate a county may impose on an individual's Maryland taxable income. It did not go anywhere, but I think that possibly the combination of those two events together is just an alarming thing of, wait a minute, how much higher is this going to go, which is the precedent for, is this a topic for discussion?
If I may add to that, Madam Chair, to Ms. Hangleiter's point, the increase that was proposed, it did not pass from the General Assembly, would have only authorized above 3.2 for high income individuals. I can't remember the exact threshold, but I think it was $500,000 a year or 600 as a family would that only that income would be allowed to be taxed at the higher rate. But either way, it did not pass.
Right. I think in that it was authorizing also, correct? It wasn't a mandate. It was authorizing the flexibility for a jurisdiction to do that should they wish to do so, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Fleckenstein, I saw your hand was up next, and then Mr. Snow.
I do. I'm interested very much in Mr. Enright's point. And I think what we're hearing about what the legislatures have proposed or not proposed, or what the council may have resolved or tried to resolve a few years ago, kind of actually makes his point even better, right? I mean, I've heard nothing to change my opinion from the last meeting, as Mr. Waddy points out, that this just seems to me like a solution in need of a problem. It just doesn't seem like there's an issue here with this at the moment. But let's say there were to, if the concern is, well, what if the legislature does X, Y, and Z? It would seem to me that if the county at that point felt that they needed to react and reconsider a cap, it's to Mr. Enright's point even more so that the proper place and the way in which to more expeditiously address that would be with the council at any given time that they can deal with it, as opposed to every 10 years in a charter review. So I just throw that out there. He makes a good point. Again, I don't see the need for it at this point in time. And then candidly, even if we felt that we did, I don't know that we're in a position to analyze what we would want to cap it at, right? I mean, if you look at some of the jurisdictions and what their caps are, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason or any consistency that we could look at and say, well, Frederick's done this and Montgomery's done that and Culver's done this, but Kent's done that. That would make any real sense for us to do it without a much better understanding of the budget process and the taxing process and things of that nature. So I do think that however we deal with this, if we're in favor of doing a cap, and I would say at this point I am not, that we should just indicate that we're not in favor of adding an income tax cap to the charter, as opposed to saying, well, we might be, but we would cap it at 2.8% or we'd cap it at 2.9% or whatever else like that. I think it would be up to us to vote it up or down as to whether there would be a cap, and then still leave the tax rate itself within the purview of the debate of the council with public input and I guess the potential to put something on the charter again if they wanted to. So that's the end of my 2 cents on the issue.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein. So, Mr. Snow, I see your hand is down. Do you still have comment? Okay. It's back up.
I was going to offer this discussion a merciless end and offer up a vote.
Yes. I was actually going to ask, and based on what Mr. Fleckenstein just said, I know, Mr. Telford, you were suggesting earlier that we actually do include a rate of some sort. I guess I would suggest, is the group comfortable if we just make a determination or maybe the motion is that we do not make a recommendation on item number 9, and we vote that up or down, or
I'll make that motion. I make a motion that we don't make any recommendation on number 9 relative to adding an income tax cap to the county charter.
I second.
All right, I guess I'll say all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
And we probably need to, so it's Mr. Fleckenstein, Mr. Enright, Mr. Waddy, and myself. Those in opposed to the motion, raise your hand. Mr. Snow, Mr. Telford, and Ms. Hangleiter. Okay. So motion passes and 4-3. Great. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Snow.
No worries. I wasn't going to be here.
No. So, Mr. Enright, did you have another comment?
Yes. Well, as a historical point, this is the 2005 Maryland State Income Tax Booklet. And going to the page that discusses local tax rate chart, 3 counties were at 3.2%. Anne Arundel County was at 2.56%. That's in 2005. And look at the wobbling or changes or lack of changes in Anne Arundel County since then. So that's why I voted to not recommend embedding, if you will, a tax cap in the charter. I don't see any wild and crazy deviations from the 2005, either from the state legislature or Anne Arundel County in the charter or in the code process. So that's my historical comment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Enright. Appreciate that. All right. So I guess the next items, I know we have Article 10 and 12 to discuss this evening. And Ms. Corby, I wasn't sure if you were going to show us that language up on the screen, like you did, like you've done in the past, or
I can if that would help. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's
yep.
I think we're kind of to the end of the line here, so let me just bring that up.
And remind me, because Article 11
it's nothing.
Right. It's just,
yeah, it's empty. So let me bring it up real quick.
Yeah, the word I'm trying to think of is not coming to my mind at the moment. But
there's not much to see in Article 11. So Article 10 primarily deals with the Ethics Commission. And then it has some miscellaneous things at the end. So I'm going to start with the Ethics Commission here. Basically just sets up the Ethics Commission. I did reach out to Michael Botsaris, who's the executive director. He said that the commission they had nothing to recommend at this time, but if that changed, he would reach out to Mr. Barron. So we can get to that part. Anyway, so more on County Ethics Commission. I'm going to skip to some other kind of miscellaneous things that we have here at the end. Compensation, copies of books, inspections, all that good stuff. Surety bonds, which I have to tell you, I'm not even certain how we handle that, except to say that I think we handle this now through risk management, but I'm not entirely certain. The compilation of laws, this is fun. This actually affects my office quite a bit. But basically this, we keep the code and the laws compiled. County seal. County seal was changed during the last administration. We have a nice, fresh, new seal that we do use these days. Definitions and rules of construction. If anybody wants to stop me, please do. As always, this is just incredibly exciting. Custody of papers. And again, I did not receive any feedback from any of the departments about changing any of this. This particular section sometimes does cause, not confusion, but Miss Blair Ms. Klassmeyer, I should say, is not here to talk to this. She would probably be the best person to talk to this because we do deal with this quite a bit. But we have some things where local governing body means that it is sent to the county executive. It's done by the county executive and sent to the council. And the council basically gets an up or down vote when it comes to this. That sometimes causes conversations. So that's about it. Article 11, again, there's nothing in here. And then finally, the best for last, section 1203, which talks about you all, and I believe there is some kind of conversation to be had about this.
Right, and we do have some language that Ms. Blair Klassmeyer drafted for us that's in the suggested language, correct? So maybe we can just talk about that, because I would like us to kind of walk through the suggested language that we have so far, to kind of start wrapping that up. But so members of the commission, any comments, questions on Article 10 or 12? Well, I guess.
Oh my God, again.
Section. Are you having problems, Tom? Okay.
I am. I keep going in and out and on the screen and off the screen and.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, now I'm not muted.
Yes. Watch what you say. No. Mr. Telford, your hands up.
Larry Telford, Chairperson Mansfield. I want to go back to something I think you talked about 3 months ago, and you kind of made an offhand comment about it, which I told you we would revisit one of these days, and that's right now. And that's the concept of splitting up the Charter Commission into two duties, which is the map drawing, which obviously makes sense that it has to be done every 10 years because of the census, but also because of, as the title suggests, Charter Revision Committee is also done every 10 years, which actually doesn't make a lot of sense to me, given the fact we have elections once every 4 years. I think this commission should consider splitting up the duties of this group into those two functions, the map drawing function once every 10 years, and then charter revision once every 4, which of course would correspond to the next election where, of course, these kinds of amendments can be given to the voters. And that's my big thought. I'm supporting you, what you talked about 3 months ago, and quickly dismissed it, but I actually thought it was a really good idea at the time, and I've not forgotten it. And I've actually talked to people about this. It wouldn't, of course, preclude people from being on both, but I think it would make sense to have a once every 4 year charter revision committee and a once every 10 year redistricting committee.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Telford. Yeah, and it's not something I'm unopposed to. I was just kind of weighing in my head, I think, if whether we make the change in section 1203, which allows this group to do its work much earlier in the process, and then we wouldn't have been in this, this kind of rushed approach that we had this year, versus whether it makes sense to divide it into two groups and have the other piece potentially meeting more often. And I guess I'm not, I threw it out into the conversation because I was trying to think of ways that we could deal with this issue that we were currently facing at that point in time. I guess I'm curious. I'm curious as to whether we would have every 4 years to review the charter. Is that time frame? Is that too much? Is it too soon? I mean, I'm not sure how often we have issues that come up and what that means. And I just throw that out for discussion because, as I said, I'm not really opposed to either option or wed to either option. But I see several hands are up, and I think Mr. Fleckenstein, your hand was next.
I appreciate Mr. Telford kind of keeping this issue out there, because I know when it first came up, I think there was a lot of appeal to consider it, and I myself I was quite open to it at the time. But I have two just comments. I think if we're going to toy with the process, the solution is to have whatever change needs to be made so that our future charter review commissions do not fall into the timing trap that we did. In other words, that we tie it to an appointment earlier in the year, similar to what other counties do. I think if the decennial charter revision commission, charter revision commission has that time, I don't think there's a need for a second commission. And every 4 years is kind of an interesting point, right? You would have the ability to kind of deal with some of these things more frequently and maybe have a little more time to deal with a major issue. This fire department discussion kind of comes to mind, right? That could be if that was going to be reviewed or overhauled in the charter, it probably is something that needs a long time and a significant study by a charter revision commission. At the same time, you've got the council that does have the ability to propose charter amendments that can go on a ballot, not in the interim in the 10-year process. Granted, they have to vote to put it on the ballot, but that can be addressed. So I think on balance, all those things considered, I'm still in favor of simply tweaking when our commission gets appointed, as opposed to having two commissions and as opposed to having one done every 4 years.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein. Mr. Waddy, I think your hand was up next.
Again, I agree. Thank you for bringing this back up. And I do think the 4-year, bringing it back over 4 years is interesting. I like it on one hand because I want to see more citizen engagement. I want to see more public engagement, especially around the charter. And I like the idea of, there being an opportunity for people to participate in this type of environment where they can look at the charter. And it also would be a more frequent check on the councils that like to add their own charter revisions. As we've seen, there's many additions to the charter that have come about in resolution form over the past 4 years itself. And so I think, reviewing that at the end of the 4 years is an interesting idea. I think I also, on the other hand, think reviewing those changes at every 10 years seems like a more feasible timeline to see what works, what doesn't, what might be necessary, and what isn't. So, I'm for the splitting of the two. I think that, other counties also split the charter revision and the legislative mapping and redistricting. So for that, but I'm not there on every 4 years because I think that having it done every 10 years kind of outweighing, given the perspective of time and effectiveness of amendments that might have actually been agreed upon and might need to be revised. It's giving me a little bit more weight towards having it every 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. Waddy. Mr. Snow?
For my part, I definitely prefer a 10-year charter review cycle. The charter is something that really should not really move that much. And so, the idea of reviewing it every 4 years, I'm not all that thrilled necessarily about that. Wholly in support of tweaking the time frame. All of us were kind of, I think a lot of us would have been able to do a lot more work and maybe had a much more productive input on this had there been more time. And so I personally don't necessarily see a need to split out the functions of the Charter Review Commission with an appropriate timeline. If things had happened the way that we had done it, right, where we do take the first part and do the mapping and then move on to the other issues, to me that didn't seem like too big of an issue. And it doesn't seem like it's been an issue much in the past. We saw the report from the last cycle and they had a nice they had several maps, lots of discussion, things like that, and with some recommendations on there. So I'm more of the mind to just tweak the time frame, add any language to make sure that we're not pigeonholed into a small time frame and leaving things as they are.
All right, Mr. Enright.
So, yes, Madam Chair. I'm agreeing. I originally was favoring splitting the commission into two parts, but now that I've heard all the discussion and proposals put forward, I'm in favor of Madam Chair, your idea of shifting the time. And let me just go in a historical point again. Our resolution 54, which listed all the questions the council wanted us to examine, was passed on 1 November 2021. Its ancestral resolution was passed on August 2011. So there's a 3-month gap. That 3-month gap, I believe, was caused by the delay in the apportionment from the census of the county, and that caused a delay. If you shift the time frame of appointing the commission back so that it can start on the charter revision discussions, and then when the apportionment numbers come in officially, they can stop that, put that on hold, and then shift to the redistricting mandate and then proceed. And when that's done, you go back to continuing the charter through the term of the commission. I don't see any problem with that because emergencies like the one we just had, the confluence of census not being reported and the COVID crisis, we have to be able to respond to that. I think the temporal shifting would be the better thing, and also to change the title to Decennial Redistricting and Charter Revision Commission, so it codifies in the title at least what this commission's all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. And yeah, and if I can't take credit for the suggestion for changing the timeline, because I think I jumped in more and said we should have 2 different groups, but we ended up talking about changing the timeline. So I definitely can't take credit for that recommendation. But all right, I guess so. Hearing just from the comments that were made, it doesn't sound like there is interest in breaking this into two groups. Am I interpreting that correctly? I think. All right. So I guess with that, do we have a motion? I guess we need a motion on this item. I mean, we do have the suggested language already to change the time frame. I believe it was going to be like the first meeting of the council cycle, which would tie to May, I believe. I know that is in the suggested language. So I'm not sure if we need a motion on what Mr. Telford brought up and moving this into 2. It looks like we may have 2 votes in that regard, but not enough. So I guess maybe we can just move on. Mr. Telford, are you comfortable if we just table that discussion and move on then? Okay, great, thank you. All right, for Articles 10 and 12 then, any other issues to bring up before we just scroll through the suggested language that Ms. Blair Klassmeyer has done for us? And I'm sorry, and I should have early on, we have Mr. Ethan Hunt with us from the Office of Law tonight. And sorry, Ethan, because I should have introduced you an hour and a half ago. I apologize for that. But, fine. Yeah, Mr. Hunt works with Ms. Blair Klassmeyer, and he's joining us tonight to kind of go through that language and respond to any questions that we might have. So with that, maybe we could just quickly jump over to that. And Laura, do you want to share your screen again and pull that up so we all have it in front of us?
So yes, and Mr. Fleckenstein, there's some weirdness going on with Zoom tonight. I'm experiencing it as well, so you're definitely not alone. Okay.
I hate to be alone in my weirdness. Thank you.
Okay, so this is it. This is the document. Sorry, scroll back up here. Don't look. Okay, Andrea, I'll just scroll through it, and if you want to do the talking.
Okay, yeah, I guess in my hope, I think what we have here is, well, the areas of the charter where we have made suggestions and recommendations. And I guess I'd like for us to scroll through it to see if we're all comfortable with how Ms. Blair Klassmeyer has changed the wording in these sections and what she has about each one. Because ideally, and we'll kind of get to our schedule under new business, but I guess I see us kind of, rounding third, coming in and closing out our work here very soon. So I guess I'd want to make sure we're comfortable with what is in here, because our next steps, well, one would be for Ms. Blair Klassmeyer, or maybe it's Ethan in this case, finalizing a draft report that Ms. Corby could get out on the website for public comment, and that our next meeting would be a public hearing, and then we'd have one other meeting to wrap all of this stuff up in the final report. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So to go through this, we started, as you know, we took a number of items off of the resolution list. We did discuss the term of office and suggesting that it goes from 2 to 3 full consecutive terms, but we also wanted to make a note in our report that the commission, that we want to point out that 3 terms does affect pension vesting, and that those are issues that should be explored. And I guess, does that accurately represent where we are? I think, Mr. Telford, I think you brought up the pension vesting issue, so I want to be sure you're comfortable with that. I know, well, I should jump back. I know we did get a comment through the portal this evening from an individual that said that person that they did not support going from 2 to 3 full consecutive terms. But I think this does accurately represent our conversations. Any concerns with what anyone sees here? And I'm sorry if you could, and if I don't see any hands, we'll just keep going on from there. With respect to compensation, we did not specifically make recommendations regarding salaries and retirement benefits as was listed here, but we did strike the $2,100 and basically inserted the language that the council shall be paid in accordance with the recommendations of the Salary Standard Commission adopted by ordinance of the county council, because that is currently how that process works. There is a Salary Standard Commission that does an analysis and makes recommendations to the council for that purpose. So we included that. Moving on, let's see, with respect to the emergency legislative sessions. And I know Ms. Blair Klassmeyer pulled those pieces together, and Ethan, this is where I may get a little confused myself. And if there's from a legal perspective, if there's anything you would want to chime in on this, or maybe Ms. Corby, but we were trying to clarify the emergency legislative sessions and how that process would work and kind of try to eliminate any confusion. So we were not making recommendations specific to Section 208. Based on Ms. Corby's analysis, we were actually making changes and recommendations to Section 307 little I, just further down.
Yes, that's correct. I can jump down to 307 if you would like, and then we'll go back up. So here we go.
Okay. So, and Ms. Corby, so remind, and this is really talking about the website and printed copies, which I know we discussed, but how does this provide further clarity in terms of when something would take effect?
Here it is.
Okay, I'm sorry. Wrong. Okay.
My apologies. I was on the wrong section.
Okay, so this would take effect from the date. So we're making changes to the 45. So this would affect the 45 days? Or no, this is, I'm sorry. The font's very small.
Yeah, so I think read the note. The commission recommends changes to the subsection to eliminate confusion between the 2 types of emergency ordinances that are addressed in this subsection. And again, if you remember, it's because in the county, we basically have 2 different kinds of emergencies. We have that acute actual emergency that comes from Section 208, and then we have the declared emergency that comes from Section 307. And so this was an idea to help clear up confusion. So this subsection is addressing the council determining at a regular session that a particular bill is an emergency such that it should be effective from the date it becomes law, but not one that rises to the level of requiring an emergency hearing. So again, we have 3 kinds of legislative sessions we can call. We have the annual legislative session, which is basically every day in May. We have the monthly legislative sessions, which are the 1st and 3rd Mondays, and then we have an emergency legislative session. So this was an attempt to try and clear up some stuff.
Okay. And I know Ms. Blair Klassmeyer pulled this together, so I would assume from her legal perspective that it makes it more clear. Correct?
Yes, I would go with what the lawyers are saying. Yes.
Okay, yes. So any comments from members of the commission on this language and how she's made these changes? All right, seeing no hands. Okay, Mr. Enright, go ahead.
Yeah, there still is and may recur the conundrum between the last month or the last quarter of the fiscal year when there's a scramble to transfer funds under 711 and 712, 716 between the offices and departments. And those titles of those ordinances, proposed ordinances, are labeled emergency. And they do not fall under the definition of either of the two types of emergencies that are already codified in the charter. So that may still raise its ugly head as it did 10 years ago. But I just don't know if that's addressed. It would only refer to the transfers at the end of the fiscal year, kind of a quote emergency transfers of funds before the end of the fiscal year, so that they can be used and not go into a fund balance when the year goes belly up.
Ms. Corby, any comments on that, or maybe Mr. Hunt?
So Mr. Enright is correct. There has definitely in the past decade been some discussion over this issue of emergency and transferring funds. But I believe the fix to that was done a couple of cycles ago, where we actually changed something in one of the 700 sections. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which one, 711, 712, that said that those kinds of bills go into effect immediately, so that we no longer have to make those kinds of bills emergencies. If you see a transfer bill, a first, second, third, fourth quarter transfer bill that is labeled an emergency, there's something else going on these days, because again, that problem was resolved through a charter change. I think it was 2 elections ago. And again, the issue was, as Mr. Enright describes, that we were getting near the end of a fiscal year. There was a transfer that was needed, but because of the 45 days, they would just make it an emergency when it wasn't really a true emergency. It was just, we got to make it before the end of the fiscal year, and 45 days would go past that. So, Ethan, are you able to find that in our charter? I can't switch pages right now. I think it's in 711 or 712.
Yeah, I'm looking for it right now.
Okay, and it says again that a transfer, it's like an appropriation or supplementary transfer or appropriation, that they go into effect immediately. So for the past several years, when we do these transfer bills, we now see there is a unique enacting clause that is the last clause at the end of the bill. So instead of seeing, like, section 3, that this ordinance shall take effect 45 days from when it becomes law, instead you just see straight up, it becomes effect upon becoming law, which is when the county executive signs it. So they just eliminated that waiting period. But, again, I mean, Mr. Enright and the rest of the commission, there is, heads always spin when we have to educate people on the charter and the 2 types of emergencies that the charter does provide. And it's confusing because you do jump between section 208 and section 307.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I just realized I was on mute.
I was wondering where you were.
Okay. All right. I know, Ms. Hangletter, I see your hand is up.
Yes, previously we had talked about the possibility of renaming 307 from, and due to all the confusion of an urgent versus emergency. Or is that still something that could be used in terms of truly the 307, the funding isn't an emergency. It's only an emergency because of that. I mean, is there any way to express that? I guess that'd be a question for Officer Law. Mr. Hunt?
I guess, yeah, Mr. Hunt, or I mean, Ms. Corby. I'm not sure how those
it
sections.
may be something to allow Mr. Hunt to discuss with Ms. Blair Klassmeyer, because these are pretty old. These are original provisions in the charter. And again, one is a declared emergency. Both terms actually draw some of their definition from different legal opinions. But the declared emergency is just like, it's 5 council members say, yeah, it's an emergency. They declare it an emergency, and they do that through their votes. It's not something that needs to be supported by necessarily facts, whereas the acute actual emergency that comes from section 208, it needs the justification, it needs facts, it needs evidence. And I do believe that it is reviewable by a court, and Mr. Hunt can help me out here, I hope. But it also requires 5 votes. All emergency bills require 5 votes. But at the end of the day, that kind of emergency the scrutiny is a bit tighter than the declared emergency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense, but I guess I'm wondering, as Ms. Hangleiter was mentioning, if there's maybe that's an issue that, yeah, between Mr. Hunt and Ms. Blair Klassmeyer, you guys can look at whether there's a better way to label these sections or better clarify. I forget what section 208 reads up above, but
we can go up there.
Megan.
Yeah. So this is where you find it. It says, as used in this section, the term emergency ordinance shall mean one which deals with an acute actual emergency necessary for the immediate preservation, blah, blah, blah. And in that green book, that famous green book that is has all the notes from the original charter board, those notes include references to the 2 cases out of the Court of Appeals that dealt with these 2 different kinds of emergencies. And I believe it said one was, it had to be supported by facts and it was judicially reviewable. The other one, that declared emergency, was just declared again, and it wasn't something that could be reviewed.
Okay, gotcha. Mr. Snow?
And just so I'm clear, our recommendations aren't necessarily binding. Is that accurate? So we would basically be submitting this in the report. So obviously, I'm not an attorney, so it's hard for me to look at the different words. But I think and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm more looking at the notes and making sure that the notes are consistently explaining our sentiment and allowing the people that are actually paid to do this to put the right words in there. Am I understanding that correct? Is that a fair assumption to make?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We definitely need the legal team to do that piece of it. Yes. But if there is a way to make it more clear that we're talking about the acute, maybe it's putting acute in the title, acute emergency legislative session or something like that, just to further clarify. That's something that you guys can take a look at.
I'll go back and discuss that with Ms. Blair Klassmeyer.
Thanks, Ethan. Yep. Mr. Enright?
Yes, Madam Chair. In terms of the so-called emergency transfers at the end of the fiscal year, I had proposed formally creating another labeling of ordinance as an expedited ordinance. And I think maybe that's what Commissioner Hangleiter was referring to differentiate that from true emergencies of the 2 types and the immediate transfer of funds to counter a real emergency. And that type of bill would be labeled an emergency bill because it would fall under the definitions in the charter of true emergencies. But the scrambling at the end of the fiscal year to transfer funds would need an expedited ordinance to transfer the funds in a timely fashion. That's what I had proposed previously. So I just thought I'd make that comment. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Enright. Yeah, but I thought that was also what Ms. Corby was saying that was addressed a couple of years ago. And so maybe that's something also the Office of Law can give us some further clarification on, because if it was addressed a couple of years ago, maybe we don't need to address it here at this point in time. So we'll look at that more closely. for sure. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Corby, you want to keep scrolling? I think the next couple sections are really more to make the charter gender neutral by changing chairman to chair.
Yeah, I think that was one of those ideas.
Yeah, and as we know, that would be done throughout. Okay, so this was really more cleanup because now it talks about actually posting things on a bulletin board, which, as we all know, really things aren't done that way anymore. That was changing it to being posted to the county's website and printed copies to clarify that. I'm going to keep scrolling. Okay, so the effective date of ordinances, the county auditor, we proposed a couple of tweaks here. And then the last section here, the 1202, is it actually should be 1203, right?
Yes.
So yeah, and they're just getting at the date change, so the next Charter Revision Commission can actually begin its work in a more timely manner, even if it is before the census data is provided. And I guess by saying this, so on the first day of the year of the annual legislative session of the county, it corresponds to May, so the first meeting in May. Correct? It wouldn't actually be.
Yes, the annual legislative session of the council is the entire month of May.
Right. Okay. Do that. Okay. Mr. Fleckenstein, I see your hand first. You're on mute, Tom.
On me tonight. So I'm reading this. Of course, I'm in favor of this tweak, but it says on the first day of the annual legislative session of the county council, we're taking out after the publication of the census, and we're saying in the year of each decennial census. Wouldn't this actually, if this had been applied, couldn't this be interpreted to mean that we would have been appointed in 2020 because that's the year of the decennial census?
Yes.
And that's not our intention, right? Our intention is to stay on the same time frame, just making sure that we get early in the year. So we don't want to tie it to the publication of the census because that pushed us way too far into 2021. But we wouldn't want this to be interpreted as to mean that the next commission is appointed in 2030, right? Am I reading that right? Does anybody else read it that way? Or is it just me being a lawyer?
So, Madam Chair, I do know, I did talk a little bit about this with Ms. Blair Klassmeyer. I think that there had been some discussion about backing it up a little bit, because I think that maybe some counties do that, but off the top of my head, I can't remember for sure. So this is definitely a question of, would you want to start the work kind of in the previous year or in the next year? And if you're doing the charter work first, that's not really dependent on the census. The redistricting is what's dependent on the census. Mm-hmm. So if you got a head start on the charter stuff, and that is a very technical term, then you would wrap that up, and then you could be in the position where you could do the redistricting. But if you were too fast, let's say, then certainly you could run into an issue with that, because you would have to wait until the end of the year. And I think, and Mr. Hunt, maybe you can help me out again here too, I think there is some federal law that says when the census has to be turned over to the president or something like that. So, you could tie it to something like that. That's another idea, but yeah, that's pretty much it. There was different ideas.
I'm assuming we've seen some other language from some other counties that do it earlier in the year that's not tied to the release of the census. I'm concerned that this could be confusing, this language.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean,
but this says to me that we would be appointed on the first day of the annual legislative session of the county council in the year of each decennial census, which would be 2030, 2020, 2030, 2040, whenever. When really what we want to have happen is to make sure that Because you're going to do the census in 2020. You're not going to get any of that data until 2021 or next time 2030 and 2031. So that's clearly the intention.
Right.
So it would be what we would have wanted would have been to have been appointed this year, well, not this year, but in 2021 on the first day of the annual legislative session in 2021, right?
Mm-hmm. So maybe it's in the year that the census would be published. Not
or what about in the year after each decennial census, or in the year subsequent to, or in the year, actually, I think I like what you said better, in the year that the census numbers are released or published, or however, whatever language would have to be used there.
Right.
So you could still, you would still be in the predicament if you refer to the publication or the release. However, this would allow you to have started on, May 1st or thereabout. So, I mean, again, I think that probably what we want to do is ask the law office to craft the language a little differently here.
Yeah, I think so.
To accomplish what you're describing. And I'm certain there's a way to do that. And certain that the lawyers in the law office are the ones to do it.
Yeah.
And so certainly there's certainly other counties that have the language that accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Right. So I was just looking back because I did look into this several months ago, and counties, they vary in terms of how they prescribe when it's done, but some of them it's the year after the census is conducted. Some of them it's in their charter, like it was Prince George's County, for example, did theirs in 1982 and every 10 years thereafter. So Anne Arundel is the only county that ties it to the publication of the census data. All of the others tie it either to a 10-year interval with a certain year as a baseline, or the actual conducting of the census, not the publication.
Okay, so we could actually say for the next one that it would be appointed in 2031 and every 10 years thereafter.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, but I know Mr. Telford, your hand has been up, and I think you're gonna wow us and solve our problem, right? You have a great suggestion.
A quick question. I know the 2020 census got to us late. Do we have a sense of when the census normally gets to us? My point is I don't know if May 1st is such a magical time to start. If we get the census like in the middle of, say, 2031, and we could have met before May 1st of 2031, we could have already had some of the charter issues or all the charter issues done, and then worked exclusively on the mapping after that, and be done in the year 2031. Because once again, we do have a filing deadline, presumably, if it doesn't change, in February of 2032. So my question is May 1st, while it's a few months earlier than how we were put together, should it even be earlier than that? That's my question.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a relevant question as well. Should it be, January of the year when the census information is released, or something along those lines?
All right, it's probably going to be best to have the law office look at some of the other comparative language that accomplishes what we want. I think Mr. Telford's probably right. I mean, if we had started in May, we would have essentially had 5 more months, which is almost a half a year. But if it was even, a month or two sooner, more time is always going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Is that Mr. Snow?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's not like we have a hard stop, though, right? So, like, if we start in May, if we do the redistricting and then went back to the other work, that wouldn't. I mean, obviously, the resolution does set some guidelines for the time frame, but I don't necessarily see us being up against a deadline for making recommendations. So, I kind of like.
We're going to have a year from appointment. So our Charter Revision Commission will only be constituted for 12 months.
So if we so in this example, May 2021, we would have to the following May. We would obviously be working on whatever charter work. We get the census information. We have to get the census probably in by December, right? Or
even earlier usually.
Yeah, probably November, December. So we're working on that, through, summer through fall, and that still gives us an additional 5 months to finish any work that we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I like the idea of it lining up with the legislative session, just knocking it out and keeping things nice and neat. That's the orderly part of me that likes that.
I tend to agree. I think the May to April, the starting in May of 1 year and finishing it, because remember, we were theoretically, when we started, we were looking at being done the end of April, and we just got that 1 month extension because of when we started. So if we started in May of the next Charter Revision Commission starts in May of 2031, it's done the end of April of 2032.
Right. Okay, but yeah, let's if the Office of Law could take a closer look at the language in terms of where it says in the year of each decennial census, and kind of try to clean that up for us, just so we're not, actually being appointed in the year when the census is actually taking place. We want to make sure that it starts after that process.
Absolutely.
Look at that. Okay, great. Thanks. All right. And Laura, was that the last change we have there? I think so. Okay. All right. So nothing too terribly crazy. Hopefully get some more tweaks done. Any other issues members would like to raise with respect to the charter before we move into other business? All right. So then I guess that then brings us to our other business, which I think the biggest issue we need to discuss is what our schedule is going to be going forward, so we can have our public hearing and meet and finalize our report and recommendations. And I know I threw out some dates in an email earlier today, and I'm hearing from some of you, I'm not sure how well those dates work going forward. But so let me pull my calendar back up. I know there was a doodle poll that Ms. Corby did, but honestly, I don't think we had more than 3 people on any of the dates that were put in the doodle poll. So we're kind of in a little bit of a quandary here, I think, in terms of when our next meetings can be scheduled. But let me ask you this. So I know I threw out May 10th as a possibility, and then the 23rd or 24th. I know there were some conflicts there. I know the council is meeting on the 9th, and I know Ms. Corby has several budget meetings that week. So I guess the week of May 16th, well, let me ask first, is the dates that I did put out, or do we have at least 5 people that may be able to make any of those dates?
I'm good for the 24th, the 25th, and the 16th.
And the 16th?
Madam Chair, yeah, I'm good for the 2 Tuesdays, the 10th and the 24th.
So I'm good for the 16th. I would not be good.
I have to jump in. The 16th is that's a council meeting day. That's a third Monday of May. So that would probably not work.
So would the 17th or 18th or 19th work, Laura?
Let's see. We have another public hearing on the 18th. So the 19th, the 19th could work.
Are we saying that would be our next meeting as well, or are we going to have another one in between?
Well, I guess I was thinking we needed to have a meeting, for a public hearing.
Right.
And then once we get that feedback, then we needed to have another meeting where we could finalize our report. So I guess I was looking for 2 dates. I don't know if the first week of May, the 4th, I don't know if that gives enough time for Ms. Corby, for Ms. Blair-Klassmeyer to finalize a report and for it to actually be publicized for public comment, because that's only 2 weeks from now.
Okay, I got you.
Does that give? I guess I'm just feeling like that doesn't give enough notice to individuals.
Okay.
Mr. Telford?
Is the public hearing virtual?
Yes.
Okay. I can make almost any of these dates then.
Okay. Yeah, I know we talked about doing, but for 2 more meetings, a public hearing is probably better virtual because more people will be able to attend that way, I think. And if it's for us wrapping up the report and recommendations, we may as well do that virtual too. I know I do have a soft spot for in-person meetings because I like to see people, but I think we're at the end of our process now, and I think it makes it easier. I think it makes it more flexible for all of us to meet at this point in time too.
Okay. Well, what about then that week of the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th? Do we have time on I think, did somebody say the 9th was no good? That's a council meeting?
It's council budget public hearing. So the whole month of May is pretty much budget time for us. Right. So
what if we did the 11th?
The 11th, I can't. That's budget presentations all day long. So I could do the 10th, the 9th, the 11th, and the 12th are budget meetings for the council. So if you like Friday the 13th, we could do Friday the 13th.
I mean, what about Tuesday the 10th?
Tuesday the 10th.
Ms. Hangleiter, that works for you?
I am fine with Tuesday the 10th. On the survey you had sent out, I did not mark the week of the 23rd through the 27th. If we're doing a single virtual meeting, I can. It's just a major event that weekend for us. And I didn't want multiple meetings, but I'm fine with making one that week.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I mean, if the 10th works for everybody it's not perfect for me, but I could make the 10th work. Does that work for everybody else?
I have a prior commitment on the 10th, but if we could still get a quorum, that would be okay.
And we can record it for anybody that, to hear any of the public comments.
Right, and it would be predominantly for public comment on the draft plan or our draft report. So hopefully we could do that, and then those comments could be circulated to everyone, and we could bring them back together. All right, so we'll do. All right, so we can do we'll do a public hearing on the 10th, which should hopefully get the report finalized and still give hopefully at least a week and a half for the public to have a chance to review and look at it.
Okay.
And then, so if we did the 10th, I know some of you said the 24th and 25th do work. I know that Mr. Fleckenstein has some difficulties that week.
Yeah, that week's going to be virtually impossible for me to do anything unless something changes for me, which I don't expect.
Okay. So I guess given that, if we had our public hearing on the 10th, is there an evening the week of the 16th? Well, Laura, let me ask you this. So the 17th, 18th, 19th, I would hope that I'll hope that our last meeting isn't that long. If we already have our draft report that we've been able to review, we just need to hear public comments and see if we want to make any final tweaks. So hopefully our meeting wouldn't be that long.
So the 19th, we could do that. May 19th.
I'm fine with that.
It's May 19th. Good. Okay.
The 31st, we couldn't do Tuesday the 31st and really just go right to the absolute deadline.
I guess we could. We kind of did it before with our last report. It was December 29th or something?
Something like that. We're saying the 19th?
19th.
I have a conflict on the 19th, but I can review and send in my comments, correct?
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, okay.
I could do May 31st if you guys wanted to come back the day, that's the day after Memorial Day.
I mean, that works.
Does that work for everybody?
Works for me.
It's our last meeting. I guess I'd like everybody to be able to participate.
Agreed.
I can do the 31st.
31st? All right, everyone's good with the 31st then? We'll do our final. Okay. And that would still give time for the council. If they want to make any of these changes and introduce legislation to do so, they would still have time for that. So, okay, great. All right.
And both meetings will be virtual. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
Yes.
All right, gotcha. Okay, I can get that set up.
Okay. All right, great. 10th and 31st. We're done. Okay, perfect. Any other items for other business? I think we're definitely kind of in the home stretch at this point. That's great. So, Mr. Enright, you're putting your hand up.
Yeah, I have a comment. Let me see if I got this right. So we're having 3 meetings coming up, the 10th, the 19th, and the 31st?
No, just 2 meetings, the 10th and the 31st.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Great. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Good to see you. Nice to see everybody here, and I hope healthy. Healthy as all of us can be, anyway, at this point. So, all right, I guess, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Right, great. Second?
Second.
Great. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, guys, have a great night. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.